Um, Michael?
Yep.
Am I unmuted? Okay. I wanted to introduce, for those of you who haven't had a chance to meet, our newest staff member, Michael Van Leesten. He joined us technically in April, but officially in June. Prior to this, had a long nonprofit career running the Pathfinders program at Hopkins, had a business career before that, a long time board member and active community member in New Haven. He spent a couple months working with 4CT in terms of helping them in the early days. And we're really excited to have Michael on our team and leading this race equity initiative. So with that, Michael.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for joining on this call. And I can just get right into it. All of us are now well aware of everything that's going on in our society, and the background to all of this is that there is a lot of work that was done by the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee over the past year or more with respect to sort of the inflection point that SVP now finds itself at with respect to looking at systemic change and looking at promoting a systemic change here in the state of Connecticut. So with the advent of the latest crisis, it really pushed to the fore many of the recommendations that the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee made in its findings. So with that, I will start out by saying that as you've seen through probably the many emails and ads and so forth, there have been lots of responses to systemic racism over the past several weeks. We were inclined less to make statements about how much how we felt about it, and we were more inclined to actually take steps to do something about it. So this is an action-oriented response. You'll note in the email that went out to all of you, we really emphasized action. And that's in part because a lot of people who frankly weren't really as aware as they are now are asking the question, how can I make a difference? What can I do? And I think it's incumbent upon us as an organization to provide those opportunities whenever possible. So, and I don't like reading slides verbatim because everybody can read. So I'll just stick to these thematically unless there's something specific that I need to get to. One of the things that's important is that in addressing systemic racial inequity, there has to be an explicit acknowledgement that it actually exists. And that has to be at the forefront of what's going on. And the systems, the systemic nature of it has led the Strategy and Metrics Committee to identify both racial equity and economic security as our overarching goal, as two of our overarching goals as an organization. So I will go to the next slide. So it's a four-part initiative. Participatory grant-making pilot. I'll explain what that is in much more detail on the following slides. Leadership and social capital development. Oftentimes you see leadership development or technical development of up-and-coming nonprofit leaders, but here we also emphasize heavily social capital development. I'll go into that in more detail. Another is to put to good use this amazing resource of nearly 200 partners, many of whom want to do something and want to help and figure out a way to get them to work with organizations that are doing advocacy work with respect to systems change and racial equity. And finally, there will be partner education. There are some significant socioeconomic and subcultural divides between SVP partners and communities that we serve. And you see highlighted there two specific workshops that really address how to get in the right mindset and also how to actively listen and participate. I have to confess, I'm a teacher by training. I spent 12 years at Hopkins teaching math. And the best way to learn about someone's mindset, in this case a student, was, and then teach them math, was actually to do a lot of listening and not necessarily become a didactic. And I'm also a constructivist pedagogically whenever possible. And I think that working with others through a process like that can be very beneficial to people who are eager to learn more. So with that, participatory grant making. So what is participatory grant making? Participatory grant making basically decouples funding from the actual grant making, the selection and decision making process. It's a democratizing process in that the community members, in this case, or in our case, it would be people who were or have been beneficiaries of organizations, of nonprofit organizations. And these nonprofit organizations would nominate individuals whom we would then select to be on this board. But these people are closest to the problem and have more information and more lived experience than any of us. And as in many other contexts in life, the people closest to the problem tend to have pretty good solutions to their problems if only they had the resources or access to the resources. This has been tried in many places throughout the world and here in the United States in a number of iterations. And the outcomes can be, the change in outcomes can be quite dramatic simply by addressing specific needs that may not be obvious to traditional funding mechanisms that where the deciders or decision makers aren't necessarily close to the problem or close to the issue. The other thing that it does is, SVP has a desire to include community input in our grant making process, in our investment process. And I saw this as a way for us to learn and learn a lot from people and learn how a process like this might work. I will also add, not included in this, but we are in the very beginnings of discussions with Fairfield County Community Foundation in terms of joining them and doing this as some kind of partnership or joint venture. There are no specifics on that yet, but it's something that we're investigating very, very seriously. So the way it works is there would be two groups of people. The first would be the implementation committee. That would include myself and several other staff members and SVP partners who would collaborate with our partner organizations to select community grant making committee members, and also that some subset of us would also serve as non-voting members of the ultimate grant making committee to provide administrative support. The community grant making committee would collaborate with us to build the process, develop guidelines, make funding decisions, set up the evaluation framework in terms of evaluating the RFPs, but also evaluating the outcomes of the organizations or individuals who received funds from us. It would be comprised of a dozen or so voting members and then non-voting administrative members. And we would seek to make, it would definitely be, the far majority of the people would be members of people of color from the communities. We have not, for instance, determined whether it's going to be statewide or specific to 2 cities in Fairfield County. We haven't decided what the theory of change will be, or if we would limit the sectors or anything like that. That will all be part of the process that we would go through with the grant making committee. And so it goes in 3 phases. We would establish the committee. We would establish the implementation committee. We'd set up the grant making committee, and then we would do basically the execution of this committee. And some folks have participated on grant making committees like this before. I certainly have at the Community Foundation. So it wouldn't be an unfamiliar process to anybody who's gone through this. But one key difference is that we would be providing a sort of an educational role what's described here as upskilling the grant making committee so that they would get familiar with how RFPs are crafted and how evaluation processes are conducted, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to just go back. I want to say that this really is your cheat sheet, this racial and equity initiative. There's some redundancy in this presentation because I wanted people to have at least one sheet that kind of laid out what we were doing. So in case you just needed to take it, print it, fold it up and put it in your back pocket, you could go and you could talk to anybody about it, or have a quick crib notes. Leadership and social capital development. So the way I described this to the board, we had this conversation. Mark, Sky, and I had a conversation with 5 Frogs, a woman named Megan Lowney there. And they are focused on leadership and technical development for minorities in nonprofits. And one of the issues that's really it's been a really tough issue is that the nonprofits run by people of color tend to get underfunded dramatically relative to the nonprofits in the same sectors run by white individuals. And that there are many reasons as to why that happens, but one of them, in my estimation, is the lack of social capital. And what I mean by that is when I explained this to the board a few weeks ago, it comes down to this. The fact that I'm sitting here talking to you, the fact that I'm sitting here, that I made this presentation to the board, the fact that I worked at Hopkins School, that I worked at Goldman Sachs, that from Goldman Sachs I went to Travelers, that I was on all these different boards of private schools, all stems from the fact that my father basically told me to go to Dartmouth College as opposed to where I wanted to go to college in 1984. And because he knew that social capital meant something, and one thing led to another, led to another. And honestly, it really, really was telling when I was at Hopkins School running this nonprofit, and the 2 biggest funders, and by biggest funders, I mean to the tune of more than $1.5 million over 10 years to that program, were 2 people who I met while on the board at Foot School. So social capital matters. And so the idea is there are a lot of people in our partnership who would be very, very capable mentors. And relationships are formed by working together on something, by having a common cause, and by getting to know each other and learn from each other and trust each other. And from there, the social connections lead to ultimately, if my experience is an indication, the ability to fund initiatives as required. So we're working with them. They're in the process of, they've listed us as one of their partners. They are in the process of raising the money for this. And you know, everything that I'm talking about is highly documented. I know the font here is very, very small, but I wanted you all of you can get a copy of this presentation emailed to you. And this graphic really does describe really well the dynamics that I'm talking about. It was created by the Bridgespan Group. Advocacy, SVP and advocacy organizations, as I said before, our partnership and our partners are a substantial asset that can contribute to long-term systemic change. We just need to identify organizations leading in racial equity work and match SVP knowledge, interest, and partner knowledge, interest, and skills, basically do a skills and knowledge and interest inventory and match those with nonprofit organizations who need that knowledge, interest, and skill. So we're at the very incipient stages of doing that. I think this is going to be sort of a summer project that a number of people, including Ronnie Goldberg and Marjorie and I are working on. And so more to come on this. But this, I think, is going to be, as we grow larger and larger and larger, we literally have a battalion of partners now. And we've got to figure out how to put them to good work and good use in this new paradigm. And lastly, there's partner education. I think this is really, really important. And I'll just repeat what I said at the board meeting. So I've been, in my lifetime, I'm only 52, but I've been poor, I've been middle class, and I've been wealthy. And people treat you, I've always been African American, but people treat you very differently depending on how much money they perceive you to have and how many credentials you are perceived to have. I consider this a glitch in our human programming, but this is how we are. This is what people do. And so what happens is we live in a very socioeconomically and racially segregated society. And it's particularly true in Connecticut. Our schools, our public schools, in fact, are the most segregated in the United States. Not anything to be proud of, but it is the reality. And so what happens is, and I'll describe a situation that really it's a positive description. So years ago, I was at my late father-in-law's birthday party in Lexington, Massachusetts, at a normal house, his brother-in-law's house. His brother-in-law was a research physician. They weren't particularly wealthy or anything. They was just a research physician and a housewife, and they had grown kids. And we had the birthday party there. And my father-in-law's one of his closest friends, a guy named Jim Harmon, planned to come to the party. Well, Jim was the president of Wertheim Schroeder. So for those of us who can date ourselves, maybe I'm dating myself by saying that name, but it was an investment bank. He'd done very well for himself. And he comes to the front door. There's no car. Where's your car? Jim, where's your car? Oh, no, he just didn't make anything of it, moved on. Barry later told me that he had flown in on his private jet to Logan, took a limousine out to the house, and then he parked 100 yards up and around the corner and walked down the street. Why? Because he didn't want to leave the impression that he was coming to this house, modest, normal home, like somebody in a limousine. He didn't have his fancy watch on. He low key. He knew his audience. He knew who he was. So he was self-aware. And so little things like that mean a lot and can reduce the amount of recrimination or misunderstanding or misreading of situations. And so being aware of those kinds of things, which isn't something that is just going to happen. It's something that has to be worked on a lot because, frankly, we live in a segregated society. And, it is what it is. We're not here to cast aspersions or feel guilty about it and all this. No, this whole presentation, let's just acknowledge reality. Let's just acknowledge reality and move forward from there, right? So in conclusion, everything that's proposed here is kind of it's an extension of where the strategic planning committee and the strategic metrics committee and everything we're doing with workforce development and systems change, it's just an extension of that. It's almost like adding another dimension to it because it's a very critical dimension that's part of the problem that we're trying to solve. It's a long-term commitment. This is not going to be solved overnight. So if you're into a battle of attrition, this is the fight for you, because this is not, there's no magic pill. Participatory grant making is really an opportunity for us to learn how to engage communities in creating solutions. This goes far beyond this particular initiative this year. It really we can optimize this and use this as a learning opportunity to really get effective and teach each other and learn from others how to do this better and better and better. For leadership development, that's really, you can teach a person, you can give a person a fish, or you can teach them how to fish. I'm all about teaching them how to fish. We want to create some catalyst for long-term change. And more than anything, and I even said this to Don when I first interviewed for this job, I said, both as a teacher, as an SVP team leader, as a CFO, as an investment banker before that, listening. Whether you're teaching or whether you're learning, you're listening. You're listening, you're listening, you're listening, you're listening, you're listening. And if there's one thing that really has paid off for me in spades in all of my careers, has been just listening. And lastly, this could inevitably, for many people, feel uncomfortable at times. And it's because the reality of the situation definitely challenges many of our foundational narratives. A lot of what we were taught in school, there were material omissions. It's not we weren't taught the truth, just we were taught a partial truth. So we didn't really know. And so a lot of people just didn't know, like, why are all these Black people upset? Well, if you never know the history, because it's never taught in school, it seems kind of irrational. But now it's coming to the fore in ways that are unprecedented. So I want to stop there, because more than just presenting this to you, I'm really looking, and we're really looking for feedback, concerns, questions. Did we consider this? Did we consider that? Anything that we can do to refine this process, to make it a better process. This is a product of us. This is Social Venture Partners. We're all partners, or most of the people on the call are partners, and this is our product. And so we're hoping to get feedback from you. And if not right now, be in touch. We can do it by email. We can do it by Zoom. Whatever works more comfortably for you, because not everybody is super comfortable in a group of 55 or 60 people. Please, we are and I am very, very open to hearing any and all feedback, whether you think it's positive or negative. We need to know everything. And I personally don't have any pride of authorship. I just am determined to get this done for the sake of the organization, for the sake of our society, for the sake of the people and organizations that we're trying to serve. So with that, I'll open it to questions and do my best to answer them. And if I don't know the answer, I'll spin it off to Mark or one of the other staff members, Sky or Marjorie, or, I won't profess to know everything, but go for it.
So I wanted to start with Juanita James. Thank you, first of all, Juanita, for being here today. Obviously the CEO of Fairfield County's Community Foundation and one of the kind of co-founders of SVP. So I saw you raised your hand.
I certainly did. Can you hear me? Is my
Yes.
audio up loud enough?
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to make a couple of comments in terms of areas of alignment between SVP and FCCF, specifically around this topic. I mean, we have together had very aligned missions to close the opportunity gap in Fairfield County. Specifically on the participatory grant making, it is something that as a foundation, we have been looking to start some type of a grassroots grant making effort without basically it being a zero-sum game and taking away from the work that we're currently doing in our competitive grant making effort to support the nonprofits who are on the ground doing the work with the beneficiaries. So this work going forward with SVP is very much aligned with our goals. Another area that we are just building our muscle or expanding our muscle is the area of advocacy. We have a dedicated, committed advocacy director who's had some long, extensive work in this area, both here in Connecticut and in Washington at the national level. The third area is the leadership development piece. We have, through our own Center for Nonprofit Excellence, a leadership development program, and are very concerned specifically about leadership development for people of color, because we see that, we say something in community, usually by the time a Black person gets to lead an organization, it's because it's almost at the point of failure. And I think that that's true in corporations, it's true in education, it's true in the philanthropy sector. Often by the time the existing powers are willing to share power, it's usually a turnaround or a situation and presents a whole set of challenges in addition to growing an organization. And I think the final area where there's some tremendous alignment between our strategic goals and positioning is around empowerment, because we recognize that if we do not empower all communities to lead, to be self-directed, to fulfill our potential ambitions, we will continue to have not just friction, but it is that lack of empowerment that leads to not only the misunderstanding, but the violence, and it eventually tears down great societies. So as Michael said, we haven't sort of ironed out the specific details because we are all juggling a lot of things right now. And frankly, we're just getting off of our fall cycle, our COVID fund response, the next steps of our strategic plan, the transition in board leadership. But this is work that we are very much working on, and we'll be looking for those opportunities to work together with SVP to move this forward, each using our unique strengths. And I believe that FCCF's unique strength is the 27 plus years of relationships that we have built with policymakers, community leaders, nonprofit leaders in the work that we have been doing. So I think as we enter a new phase of relationship with SVP and FCCF, I see tremendous upside potential.
Juanita, I totally share your view about all the areas of alignment. And this whole strategy that Michael's laid out is really about partnership. We can't do, as SVP, this work alone. We need great partners like FCCF. And as you look at each of the elements here, whether it's leadership development of people of color, whether it's working with advocacy organizations on systemic change, all of this requires deep partnerships. Obviously, the participatory grant making requires deep partnerships with community members. I saw a question from Martha Olson. Michael, she's asked, when do you expect to raise the 200,000? And given that we're targeting long-term change, is that enough?
So because this is a pilot, all right, first, no, it's not enough. It would never, we will never raise enough money. It's a pilot, and we plan to raise the money over the summer, and certainly over the next couple of months. We've already started talking to a few people, and we'll see where that gets us, and then we'll be able to publicly announce. We'll have a more public phase to our fundraising. If FCCF and SVP combine forces on this, will also be our process will also incorporate whatever fundraising timeline that FCCF has and whatever means of fundraising they decide to do. In terms of, is it enough? For its purpose as a pilot, yes. One of the things that's really important, because we're trying to do something that really has not been done in the state, is to make sure we don't get in over our skis and make sure we create a manageable process the first time out. I know we could perhaps be, more ambitious in terms of funding, but right now what we want to do is make sure that we execute on the things that we can execute, because there's so many new variables that are going to be incorporated in this process, and we have to work through and learn. I think longer term, yes, this would require, this process, participatory grant making, would require a significant amount of money. And I'm talking, in our state, 8 figures, and over the course of a decade, 9 figures. I'm not saying we're going to do that, but one of the things we can do, and this is, I don't know if I didn't emphasize this, but it is an important factor. We are trying to set an example. We are trying to create a working model for how other organizations can also execute this here in our state. And so it's critically important that we are successful, that our process, the process by which we do this, is critically important. That process has to be successful, in addition to actually having successful execution of whatever the nonprofit recipients' missions are. So I hope that answered your question, but for
There,
this.
there were a couple, Michael, couple other related points. Martha actually was also asking where we expect to raise the money.
Mhm.
And Phil asked a question about, will the pilot be focused in a single location or locations with similar challenges?
So the first thing is, what was the first question again? Because I just focused on
Where are we going to raise the money from?
the money. Okay, so SVP will raise the money from entirely within the partnership. Okay, so whatever money we raise will come from social venture partners. In terms of geographic scope, that is to be determined. We do not know yet. It's gone, some people have said, why don't we do Bridgeport? And other people have said, we should be statewide, and everything in between, right? So, and there doesn't seem to be a right answer. There seem to be pluses and minuses. There seem to be pros and cons, and we have to weigh those. And so I don't have an answer to that right now, but it is something that we're considering.
Couple other points on the comments here. Just to mention them, Lindy kind of made the comment that it's important that community members be precluded from being, ones applying for money, obviously,
Definitely.
in order to have, a process that has integrity.
Yes.
Don had a comment that in addition to investing our own dollars, we could try to influence other funders, like you were saying, Michael, and showcase this as a potential model. And Don, I don't know if you had any other points you wanted to elaborate on that.
Just that the money that we influence, I think, is just as important as the money that we invest from our own fund. And I think the strength of our partnership, the 180 members that we can deploy to identify and work with organizations doing work to address systemic inequalities across the state, it's a huge asset that we should be cognizant of. So it's not just the money that we can raise and invest from our own fund that we should be thinking about in terms of impact.
Right point. And I think Dorothy had a point on here that we should reach out to Graustein. And I know that, Michael, you are in conversations with them.
I can give you an update. So the Graustein Foundation, I talked to David Adams on Monday, and they had actually allocated money to community, participatory grant making for this fiscal year. And they just started community conversations, and then COVID hit, and that upended everything. So their momentum just got stopped cold. And he didn't really he didn't give me an indication as to whether they were even in the process of restarting that or really trying to do a reset based on everything that's been going on. So yes, they have been long a champion of community conversations and conceptually a champion of this process. They just haven't gotten to it yet because of the latest crisis.
I love Mike Storrs' point. Mike, why don't you want to share it with the group?
Well, Michael writes, well, everyone can see it, but he requests, will we request that all SVP members contribute? He thinks there should be a huge push to have 100% of SVP members behind this. I'm not going to argue with that. I think that's a wonderful idea. And we certainly will request from everyone.
Yeah, I think, there's power behind that. If we're going to start making change, we need buy-in from every one of our members, and to be able to go to any other donor, especially for larger asks, to say, listen, we are a member-based organization, and we have 100% participation from every single member who's behind this.
Yes.
And I think there needs to be some push or some type of communication to all of us to say the importance of this for us to make change. And it doesn't matter the dollar amount. It really doesn't.
Exactly. Exactly. I've crafted that email in my head 30 times. So that's definitely on the agenda. Definitely. And what you said before, if people can give, they're going to be core donors. They're going to be a certain number of people who can give fairly significant amounts. But if people give something meaningful to them, given whatever their circumstances is, because a lot of people have already given a lot of money this year to a lot of things, and then we're popping on the scene. So it's not necessarily, you call somebody and you just assume they have capacity right now. But what you do is, yes, 100% would be absolutely amazing and make a powerful statement, an absolutely powerful statement. In the same way that, honestly, when I presented all this to the board, I was very happily dumbstruck by the unanimity of their support of this. And I thought there would be like more debate or something, but no, it was like, let's go, let's move. And I think if the organization as a whole feels that way, then yes, the credibility that comes with that would be absolutely amazing.
I'm also happy to say that there's definitely momentum. We're nearing 100K, and we've just started. Literally just had some individual conversations with people,
I think we talked
and haven't really done the ask across the partnership. Other questions that people have or comments on this? Ideas, in terms of ways to kind of ideas for this kind of initiative, because as Michael said, it's really still being created. And I think kind of one of the things to kind of take away from this, it's not just a fundraising kind of ask. Very much the things we're talking about here are also to engage SVP partners in these different efforts. Whether it's on the advocacy side in terms of working with different nonprofit organizations, whether it's on the mentor side, working with Five Frogs and other organizations that are involved in leadership development, whether it's working on the fundraising side or with the Participatory Grantmaking Committee, whether it's working with Partner Education, because we'd like to kind of set up a whole series of workshops and learning opportunities. Obviously, a lot of people, I'm sure on this call, are reading books and articles or looking at videos and such on this topic. And we'd like to create some, kind of intimate conversations, among partners and community members, et cetera, on this topic. So. Jim has a question, Jim Follett. Michael, what will be the top 3 or 4 priorities over the next 30 to 60 days?
Priority number 1, raising the money. Priority number 2 is going to be figuring out what our basic design will be. We're talking to a number of, as I said before, we're talking to a number of foundations. Number 3 is working with, figuring out what exactly our relationships with Fairfield Community Foundation will be, because Juanita, I was talking about aligning with the Community Foundation with respect to the Race Equity Fund, but we have not talked about the advocacy and the leadership development piece of it at all. So, and what it is because we're, obviously separate organizations, we actually have to work through and actually talk to each other and spend a lot of time figuring out like what our alignments are and make sure that we're aligned properly and that we're staffed properly. And like there are a whole bunch of things that you just can't take for granted when you get 2 organizations together. So I think the bulk of the work is going to be fundraising and investigating and basic structuring or scaffolding of these projects. And also the other thing is the project that I'm working with Ronnie and Marjorie on in terms of how we manage the supply side of SVP in terms of working with advocacy organizations. And that could be how we work in conjunction with FCCF or independently or both.
Karen Brown asked a question, Michael, about kind of what's being planned on partner education in terms of format, frequency, et cetera. Any kind of, I know we haven't really developed a plan on that yet, but do you have any thoughts on that?
In terms of format, this is my initial impression, and this is, I can't speak for everybody on the staff right now, but my feeling is that actually every partner should endeavor to, if we're doing this right, every partner will want to do that poverty simulation. Every partner will want to do the narrative for workshop or something like it. It can be profoundly enlightening and really helps. It's almost like, it can be almost a social lubricant, because it's a lot easier to talk to somebody or relate to somebody when you have some sense of what their experience is. So in terms of format, the formats really are workshop, sort of constructivist formats, and they would be facilitated by professionals that work for those organizations. In terms of frequency, I don't have any idea. I would say that if we get to the point where we're mentoring folks in whatever capacity, that they should do these workshops before they start mentoring. In terms of frequency, I don't know yet.
But we are going to create a SVP. Think of these projects as having kind of their own, partner teams, which may include, SVP, FCCF people, and to plan out these activities. And even though we're kind of in a virtual environment right now, which is kind of in some ways kind of not as attractive as face-to-face for these things, we can still do things like breakout sessions and small discussion groups, virtually, and still create more, interactivity. So that's going to be kind of what we're, aiming for. I see a couple of questions in the chat
David.
room here. From Laura Kaplan, what will be the process of identifying the community members who will serve on the grant making committee? Then what is the process what's the process for making those decisions?
So the first is, the only thing I can tell you right now is that we will be crafting a nomination request to the nonprofits, both our partner nonprofits and other very reputable nonprofits. Like I just spoke to Patricia Felton up at New Haven Promise, for instance. They would nominate people, but we would have to give them the criteria for what we were looking for. So that's something that we have to work on. Again, it's part of that structuring the process. So that's, and then in terms of how we would actually select them, that is to be determined. We're looking at a lot of different models to figure out what that would be. So we'll be getting back to you on that.
Dave Berkowitz has a question, Michael, which is a very hard question. What outcomes are necessary for SVP to view this effort as successful? So,
and I'm not trying to be like, put weasel words in here or something. The most important thing, and this is kind of strange because we usually don't evaluate process in terms of outcome, right? But what we actually have to do is evaluate and really take a hard look at the process of grant making that we engage in, and evaluate how that works for us. FCCF is involved, how that works for SVCF. What did we learn? What can we take with us into our investment process? What can we do again, or what's replicable? What other organizations actually look at, we can get other people to assess what we've done. We can go to, I'm sure we could get, the folks at the Graustein Foundation or others to pick apart what we've done and give us an evaluation of what we've done. But the idea would be to, long term, we would have to see, well, what was accomplished with the funds, and how did that compare to what the goals or objectives were at the time the money was granted. With respect to deploying social venture partners, deploying partners to work for advocacy organizations, well, it would look, I think, very similar to what we're doing now in our investment process, in terms of you simply have you have a mandate as to what an organization needs help with, and did you complete what the objective was or objectives were. With respect to, for instance, the leadership development, social capital development, the near-term sort of indicator is how many people we've actually deployed to help and to be mentors. We won't know unless we do this consistently over a long period of time. We will be able to look back longitudinally and say, look, we did this and it influenced these people and influenced their ability to raise money, and look at the difference in their organizations, or we would have to figure out some way to look at it longitudinally. And that's one of those long haul questions. That's not, there are no short-term data points that would say we're a success and you can just walk away.
I would also add that we're going to really listen. We're, really carefully to our, community partners on this. On the leadership development side, some of the organizations that, FCCF is funded and that we're kind of talking about here have a really deeper understanding of the opportunities and the needs in terms of developing a really powerful change-making network led by leaders of color, people of color around the state. And they're going to define, what the ultimate kind of objectives, and we're going to offer our support in terms of making that happen. And similarly, on the advocacy side, organizations like, for example, Connect, who, I don't know if anybody caught the article in Connecticut Mirror today, where they are organizing faith leaders around a really active agenda in terms of racial equity. I immediately reached out to the leader, to the staff leader of Connect, because we, had a lot of, discussions in the past, and asked, how can SVP be helpful? We're not the ones determining the objectives here, but we can apply our resources in a way that is supportive of community partners like that. So I think that, David, I'm not trying to duck the issue in terms of coming up with kind of a specific goals, but I think the goals really need to be co-created, with our partners, community partners. I see a question from, no, I just saw some people sharing items. Other questions that people have or comments that they want to make about this? Well, we want to respect everybody's time. So, Michael, do you want to make any kind of last closing, remarks here?
Yeah, just first of all, thank you for your enthusiasm. I can say personally, this has been one of the more fulfilling professional moments of my life. And it's too bad it had to come in the middle of a crisis, but maybe that's just what it took. I'm very, very encouraged by the enthusiasm and the energy that people are devoting to this. I think a lot of really important work, very important work can get done, and that for a small organization, we could actually have an outsized influence. We could really have a tremendous influence on a lot of what's going on in Connecticut with respect to addressing systemic change, addressing the way philanthropy is done. It's really inspiring to be in this particular spot. There's a lot of leverage here, and I think we could. Not only will it be, it's really wonderful, but it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing.
And
So,
I just want to thank everybody for your participation today, and just encourage everybody to kind of stay involved in this. I think this is the most important thing that SVP Connecticut has ever done before. And I like to feel that we've built the organization for this purpose. And thank Michael for your extraordinary leadership and in this, and Juanita for your, partnership, and really look forward to what we can be doing together on this.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, I guess that's it. But be in touch if you